Welcome to the Insights to Communicate podcast with Adam Probalski, where communications, research, and strategy come together.
Bo Breuklander, welcome. Thanks a ton for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Happy to be here.
So, Bo, I'm going to characterize you in my own way, and you can correct me and tell us all about your journey. You are kind of like an internal comms expert, but you've also done other things in this communications world, including you started out with Major League Baseball. So you got to kind of speak to that a little bit. I know you're only an intern, but that's pretty damn cool. So why don't you tell us about your journey, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So the funny thing about that is it was actually a minor league team in Tulsa. So it was the Tulsa Drillers, and they've got a lot of history there. They've bounced around from major league affiliation since I was there as an intern. But when I was there, they were affiliated with the Colorado Rockies. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a big baseball guy. And so writing, when you think about writing for things that aren't of interest to you, writing 82 game stories for an entire season, you had to really dig, right? What was the story of that game? Not every game is the same. Not being a big baseball fan, you had to find ways to make to tell the story in a way that was interesting to your audience and your fans.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'm a little bit of a baseball fan, but I do find sports talk and sports reporting to be ridiculously repetitive and uses words over and over and platitudes, and it's just not that interesting sometimes. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was funny. There was one time where we had a dog night at the park, and it was later into the season.
This is double A ball, folks. Yeah,
Exactly. We had dog night, and it was definitely not the same night that we had fireworks. I can promise you that. But we had dog night. Bring your dog to the park, and after the game, they could let all the dogs onto the field and run around. And it was so far in, and again, this is me as an intern. It was so far into the season, and I tried not to repeat the same storylines over and over. So I had way too many canine references in the game story, and so we had to scrap it. So yeah, a little story about trying to not tell the same thing over and over. But anyway, yeah, it's funny.
So obviously that was early on in your career, an internship, but tell us the track you took and how you got to be in internal comms.
Yeah, absolutely. So after graduating from Oklahoma State, after having that internship and an internship with an agency locally there in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area, I decided to get my master's degree at University of South Florida, which I did. While I was attending school in the evenings, I was building social media and digital platforms and websites for a nonprofit association who had a global audience. Created video series for them, really set the foundation. They're still doing some of the things today that I created over 10 years ago, which I'm proud of. And then going from there, moving into payment software and technology, still external, but that was kind of my first dip into internal communications. Beyond employee advocacy and social media realm, they asked me to build their first ever intranet. And this was an international company. So we had different languages and software. So I had to really get my hands dirty, roll up my sleeves with the change communication process. And I wasn't change management certified at that time. So it was really raw for me. And there were a lot of difficulties. And we came out on top through that. But going from there to Jabil, a large global electronics manufacturer, where I obtained a change management certification. And I did own internal communications as well as external communications for our supplier partners. It really, really opened my eyes to what needed to be done and relationships to build across an organization that was 200K plus employees at a given time, 260,000 at one point. So I've worked for all kinds, nonprofits, banks, regional banks, large manufacturing firms, software companies. And even right now, I spend part of my time supporting Embark Collective here in Tampa. They're a nonprofit that helps develop Florida's tech startup community, which I'm really proud of. So they do a really good job there. I help them with some member operations. But yeah, that kind of sums up my experience before I launched Breuklander Communications.
Talk a little bit about change management and change communications. I don't know that everybody fully understands that. And then maybe put in there, does that have to be a top down process? Or does that ever come organically from within the organization? Maybe talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So I'm going to start actually by mentioning that change communications is way more important than just inside your organization. I think as a someone who has PR experience and external communications background, anything that starts inside can go outside the company, and vice versa. So to answer your question, yes, it's both. We talk about leading from the middle or leading from within.
Yeah.
So leadership and relationship building, change is happening all the time, and so that goes into any change management, any change communications right off the bat. But you do need leadership, just like any effective campaign, communications campaign. You need some authority backing you, right? You have to have a sponsor for a program or the change. You have to have a voice, but at the same time, while you need that, you need peer influence. So you need peer buy-in. So if you can get somebody who has, let's say, gone through that change before at the same company and another company, or they've already bought in, they were part of the pilot program for a new technology, for example, you can really leverage them as somebody who sits in that same seat as the audience you're trying to influence as a driver of that change. So it goes both ways.
Talk a little bit about the tools you've got at your disposal for internal communications. I think in a lot of cases, medium-sized business or organization like government or a nonprofit, there's a newsletter that comes out every quarter,
Mm-hmm.
and it highlights the employee of the month, or maybe there's a memo from the CEO when somebody does something really good. I mean, and that's internal comms for that organization. And obviously, there's ones that have podcasts and daily briefs and all kinds of stuff. So what are the tools you have available to you? And maybe talk about a war story or two of like how you took an organization from the quarterly newsletter to something real.
Yeah. Wow. So many stories. Okay. That's a great question. You know, I'm trying to think of the best story that I could tell here. Um, but as far as tools at my disposal, um, I did experience a time at an organization where they did just what you said. They sent out the newsletter, but imagine doing that with no metrics behind the newsletter. You don't know who read it, you don't know who opened it, you don't know who it's going to. It was a nightmare, right? Having that external communications experience where I'm sending emails to customers, I did some digital marketing. I understand the importance of evaluating your efforts, big or small, right? Not on a campaign level, but even on a tactical level. When you don't have metrics to evaluate on a tactical level, and you don't know if it's working, you're wasting your effort. So to speak to that, it's really hard to get buy-in, get budget. As communicators, we're always struggling to get our hands on dollars, right? It's just a fact of the matter. Having that data to support leadership buy-in to increase the budget, that's how it happens. That's how it happens. It's all data back. And platforms, having the right platforms and tools are a way to go about that. If you don't have the right tools and platforms um, to start with, it's going to be really difficult, not just to do your job, but to sustain doing a good job. One thing I always go back to is even without the metrics, pick up the phone, call somebody. Hey, does this hit with you?
Right.
And I've had to do that, right? That's part of this war story, right? Where they didn't have metrics. I had to make a lot of phone calls. Phone calls are great, but with zero metrics to start from, you've got to make a lot of phone calls and get a lot of qualitative feedback.
Yeah.
And qualitative feedback is something that also is largely missed, right? You can't discount qualitative feedback. I mean, open-ended questions and surveys and things like that are always beneficial, but yeah, you've got to have the right tools and know your audience.
How does employee survey work feature in the work you do for internal comms? Is that a critical component? Do companies really take that data to heart? Like when you get responses from employees, do you see the C-suite actually reading those reports and taking it to heart, or is it just something that you look at once in a while?
Yeah, to take that into context, if you're sending out an annual survey and that's the only survey that an employee would get, you might get valuable feedback. Um, if you're only relying on feedback once every 12 months, I think you're already starting off on the bad foot.
Right,
So you need consistent feedback, and that's where that tactical measurement comes in. Are your messages resonating with your audience? Um, Sometimes this annual survey, depending on the organization, uh, you have to tack on questions onto an HR survey, for example.
right.
And that's always a sticky situation, right? I think communications needs a dedicated line of feedback, separate from HR, separate from business development, separate from everything else. Now you can still ask questions on surveys because you don't want to oversaturate. That's another major problem is oversaturating communications to employees.
Right.
But so you do that, you limit that in any way that you can. But I would say don't limit it to just once a year. You've got to have a steady stream of feedback. And I'm not saying you do a survey for feedback every month.
Right.
I'm saying don't just rely on surveys.
Sure. And maybe, or have some open forum where people can anonymously comment or not, or directly comment. So you can kind of get that consistent feedback.
Yeah, I've done focus groups that work out really well. So you apply the same external research methodology
Right.
and you apply it inside an organization. And the great thing is there, right? Instead of trying to gain a good, when you think about sample size, you're trying to reach a much smaller population. So you can really, really find out what the pulse of an organization is just by talking to people.
I like this theme of internal comms just because most people in PR, most people in communications, or actually most people in the public world look at PR and they think of this, what was the Sex and the City character, Amanda or something like that. She was a PR, or that
Yeah, yeah.
typical woman in PR who's on her
Glamorous.
treadmill, yelling at the football player for whatever. But the truth is that internal comms are pretty significant, but we just don't talk about them much. Is there like a secret world of internal comms that you all talk to each other and figure out how to move the ball forward, or like get the tools to, you said, get budget, right? How do you
Mhm.
talk to C-suite or management and convince them that this is something that's really needed? How does that work? How do you get from, this is not something we have in-house, this is not something we even want because we're trying to get coverage in the Wall Street Journal, to a place where you have $100,000, a $500,000, $1 million budget?
Yeah, so there is a group of internal communications folks that network with each other. We have similar issues, but I would say that one of the big challenges is reporting structure. A lot of internal communications folks sometimes they report into human resources,
Right.
and when you report into human resources and you think of budget, you're going to get budget for human resources, strategies and efforts, right? You're not going to get resources for business development, which internal communications, in my perspective, you need somebody at the leadership level. Ideally, that's another communications official, right? CCO or even a CMO, for example. But
Right.
it's about operational alignment. It's about employee engagement. So there's a hand in HR, IT when you think of new technology adoption. AI is a big one right now, and governance, and we've got to have influence there as communicators. Marketing is another big one. We can really support marketing for an organization when everybody's on the same page. So it's about organizational alignment, and I think that is the structure that you need. Everybody wants to report to the CEO. Everybody wants a seat at the table.
Right.
But just like any PR or strategic communications professional out there wants to influence that circle and people in that room, even if you don't have a seat at the table, the same is true for internal communications. So really, it's just a change of audience, right? So rather than just speaking, so many of the same rules and strategies and methodologies apply internally as they do externally. So PR folks, internal comms is your best friend and vice versa, right? We can share stories. We can share ways to gather data. We can share thought leadership. One of my favorite statistics out there is that a study from Edelman and LinkedIn. 73% of their survey respondents say a company's thought leadership is more trustworthy than information in marketing materials.
Right.
So using that, you can have your employees, and when I say employees, yes, I mean the C-suite. You can have them share things out, and that the ease of doing that comes from an internal communications perspective of knowing how to reach those people, how to move them, how to motivate them, how to engage them as employees, as executives. So it's not just reliant on the PR person or the marketing person, right? Internal comms is a huge ally for that. Business development,
Yeah,
same story.
sure. Okay, so you referenced AI and you talked about technology. I think there are real limitations with AI today. There's really cool multipliers that come from it. Is there anything unique that we haven't heard about that AI is doing from a comms perspective that you're doing? And what are those like actual hard tools that you have at your disposal from a tech standpoint? Is it like on the PR side? There's Muckrec and any of these platforms that you can put your releases out or track journalists and things like that. What are those tools that you've got available to you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of them, and some of them there's a lot of overlap. One of the ones one of my favorite tools is Grammarly, right? And I think a lot of writers are familiar with Grammarly, but um, from an internal only or internal specific perspective, you've got email platforms that integrate. Like I think all the integrations with the platforms that you use, the Microsoft 365 suite, and of course there's Copilot, which is great. A lot of the ChatGPT integrations. There's integrations now with uh, image generation
Oh yeah.
through email platforms. Workshop is an email platform for employee communications and engagement, and they just announced, I think this week, that they've partnered with Canva.
Oh,
So where you don't have to go out to Canva to create your graphics. You can do it right there in the tool in the email platform as you're designing. Uh, AI for design is one. So it's not just for writing or content creation, right? It's really about finding the optimal way to resonate with the audience you're trying to reach and get them to do the thing that you want.
very cool. Okay, so you wake up in the morning, and my expectation, there's two kind of people. They wake up, they meditate, and drink their herbal tea while while looking at the mountains in the distance. And then there's the rest of us who immediately grab their phone, check 14 different news sources and apps, and get going. Which are you?
I am always striving to be person number one,
Okay.
but I probably fall into the second category. Every morning looks like for me is I wake up early, get my son ready for school, and we hit the road. And where I live, there's so much traffic. I'm listening to podcasts before, so it's a little combination of both. Like I may be a third category.
Okay.
So before, I check some messages before to make sure there's nothing urgent. If there's nothing urgent, I put my phone down, hang out with my kid for a few minutes, take him to school, hit the road. While I'm on the road, I listen to something else. You know, um, I'm in the office about 3 days a week, get there about 9 a.m. And then the work starts. I really try. It's really, really hard. Um, Something I've had to develop over the years where I don't just work the whole time. Like I give myself that space.
Yep.
All right. It's easier said than done, but I give myself that space. And honestly, sometimes I ditch the professional development podcast or the PR or internal comms podcast and listen to sports radio for that hour when I drive to work.
Ah, yeah.
But that's my version of green tea in the morning, I guess.
Sure. What are those critical apps that you've got to look at in the morning or at some point throughout the day? What couldn't you live without?
Ooh, good question. Well, I'm constantly getting pinged by, I think I've got 3 different calendar apps.
Oh,
And so really it's my scheduling and my calendar.
right.
I've got one for everything, and I wish they all talk to each other. That's an opportunity for AI, I guess.
Yeah.
But really just keeping my life on track between family and the different obligations I have, because I also teach PR and communications at the University of Tampa. I've done that for 7 years. So making sure that my teaching calendar is ready to go, because I've got to develop, got to write the syllabus, got to develop the course material, got to do grading, got to do all that stuff in the day too, because I don't want to spend my nights doing that.
Is that undergrad or
I
master's?
teach undergrad. Yeah, I teach undergrad two sessions right now as an adjunct at the University of Tampa. All of them are night classes, so work during the day, teach at night, and I've got a variety of students in there from freshman to senior. Right, it's the whole age range.
I'll tell you, I really enjoy teaching, guest lecturing, things like that, and I've done a decent amount of it. But I will say, on the undergrad side, it can be more annoying than it is rewarding. For someone to come in, for a couple hours and be a guest lecturer, because I don't see on the undergrad, I don't see the engagement from those students that I see from people in a master's program, or is that like a challenge for you to kind of like bring kind of that engagement out of them, or are you fine with that and you just kind of like give them the information and move on?
Yeah, yeah, it's a welcome challenge to draw that out. I actually come from so my grandparents were PhDs, science professors. So I'm used to being around teachers, and my grandmother, she also taught high school science, and so I've heard stories, right? You can't engage everybody, just like and in the professional life, you can't engage everybody. But when you do find those one or two students that are always engaged, and I'm not talking about teachers' pets,
Right.
but I'm talking about people who really want to learn. Like if you're in a master's program, that's what you want to do professionally, and you're really invested in that. As an undergrad, if you're not, you might not be fully invested. But what I try to do, especially in this class, I'm teaching media writing this semester, is at the end of that's how I get them invested. Is I I want them to commit to a brand, not just a brand that they like, but a brand or a company they at this point think they want to work for, and they got to stick with that brand the rest of the semester. Throughout all of our writing projects, they're writing press releases, they're acting as a journalist, writing a news story,
Yeah.
they're doing podcast interviews, like creating video scripts, the whole thing, the whole 9 yards. But the idea is that at the end of this semester, they're going to have a writing portfolio, something that they could submit in job interviews. And I think that's one way that I really, really think that you're going to capture someone's attention, because not everybody likes to write, not everybody likes to create content. But if you can use what you're doing beyond getting the grade, or just making a passing grade, pass fail thing, then you can really get that uh, engagement boost that you're looking for.
I love that idea because at one level, I guess it takes a little bit of the creativity out of it, right? For every assignment, you don't have to come up with some new concept, some new brand that you're writing about. But it also, I think, lets the students focus, right? You don't have to use mental power to figure out what my topic is or what my subject is, and you can really just go right to the core of getting the work done. I like that a lot. That's very cool. I don't know if I've ever like heard that before.
Yeah, and I also like to use my class periods as not just lecture time to get up there and speak. Um, I, I don't like talking a whole lot, so I do like to teach, spend some time teaching and presenting and showcasing new ideas to them. But then half the time they're working on the assignments, they're doing the projects, they're collaborating. I think of it as coming in from the professional world, right? I'm not a full time teacher. I'm not a PhD professor or anything. So I'm coming in there from the business world, thinking, okay, I've got an hour and a half to 2 hours to spend with these kids. I'm not going to talk at them the whole time. They're going to stop listening after 30 minutes.
Sure.
So to keep that engagement, let's do the work in class. You know, everybody can relate to going to meetings at work, and those meetings spawn two or three other meetings. Nothing gets done, and you're just meeting all the time.
Right.
Well, I take that that pain into the class and try to alleviate that, where they're actually leaving class with something that they've done and learned, rather than something that is on their mind weighing them down that they have to do. Now, that's not with everything. That's not 100% of the time, but that's this semester, and I think that's going to be a benefit to the students.
That's great. All right, let's wrap with your mantra, your theme phrase, your words of wisdom that you have for the world.
Oh boy. Let's see what I have here. Yeah, the world thrives on relationships, and relationships are built on trust, which comes from familiarity. So people trust people more than logos. And with that, that speaks to internal audiences and external audiences. And so everything we do uh, from a professional standpoint is all about relationships. And so, building that coalition inside a company is really helpful. And so that's it.
Okay, but that prompts me, I now have to have a follow-up there, because you talked about familiarity. And I absolutely agree with you that we are drawn to people we're familiar with. We relate better to people we're familiar with. And that comes in a lot of different forms, from a work environment, from a community that we're a part of, from the way we look, from the way we talk, from the foods we eat. How do you build trust in disparate communities? How do you do that? Because that's the ticket. If we're drawn to people who are just like us, how do we learn to trust, or how do we get people who don't look and talk and eat like us to trust us?
What a great question. So there are always commonalities with the relationships we have with our families, the relationships we have with our friends and others, the relationships we have with the different foods that we eat. Because in a lot of cultures, people revolve around food and get-togethers, even if it's not the same food, even if it's not the same people. There's always some similarity where you can find that understanding. And finding that understanding when you're trying to bridge that gap and bridge that divide, just like anything else, understanding your audience matters. If you can understand what's important to them and relate to what's important to you, there's always a connection to be made.
Awesome. Bo, thanks a ton for joining. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Adam. This was a great conversation. Look forward to the next one.
This has been Insights to Communicate with Adam Probalski, president of the woman and Latina-owned market and opinion research firm, Probalski Research.